everybody, and welcome back to the Chilluminati podcast, episode 269. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Mike Martin. Today, joined by the Dwight and Angela of LA, Jesse and Alex.
OTP.
I gotta say, I'm gonna be real. I'm the Angela in this situation. 100%.
Really? Yeah.
I get okay. If Dwight had taste, that's me, because I'm just as mad as Dwight.
Yeah.
I just like cooler shit,
so
I get away with it.
You're better with your anger, though. You know, if Dwight had weed. Has Dwight had weed? That's not. They didn't.
My favorite episode is when Dwight finds weed on the premise.
Yeah. When he's trying to get somebody arrested and basically, it's
good.
great.
It's a good episode.
Yeah, it's great.
All right. Well,
Listen,
I'll
I've
take
seen
that. I'll
The
be
Office
Dwight.
multiple times. Okay, I'm sorry. It's one of the few things I have a deep knowledge of.
A deep knowledge on choice.
Originally, no, and then as time went on, yes.
God bless.
I was forced. I had never seen The Office, and I was like, the person I'm with still, but dating was like, you have to watch The Office. So we started watching The Office, and then I started really liking The Office after a couple seasons, and then it was by choice. Welcome back to the Chilluminati podcast, everybody. We're not an Office breakdown podcast, but we will be when we run out of topics to cover here.
That's what's next. That's what's right
next
behind the paranormal shit is just an Office breakdown podcast.
Yep.
Because by that point, all of the original cast members will be done with their various versions of Office breakdown podcasts, because there's one for everybody out there. And then it'll be a void for us to fill that we can jump in and take.
That's
looking ahead, long term.
That's such specific, weird business plan. It's so.
I would have said poor business plan.
So presumptuous about what people are going to care about in the future.
Sure.
Yeah. I just kind of know.
You just know. He just knows.
Yeah, I do. So don't worry about it. I've got us covered. That's what we're doing after that. And then after that, Friends re-listen podcast.
I would rather shut this whole thing down than get into like the will they, won't they of Ross and Rachel. Don't care. Do they care then? Don't care now.
9 seasons? You can go through? Is it? Anyway, Alex, the way they can keep us away from that is what?
The finest website ever made. Are you guys hearing these dogs that are going insane outside my house right now? It's so crazy.
That's outside your house. Okay.
Yeah. They're just revved up because they aren't on patreon.com/Chilluminati pod. That's what's going on here. Let me tell you, because they just found out that because they're not on there, they don't get ad-free episodes. They just found out they don't get a mini-sode after every episode. Yeah. They found out they don't get that sick ass art every month from Mel. You know what I mean? They're pissed. They don't get the brand new show, Rotten Popcorn. Just started. Tons of movies on there that aren't available for public consumption. Actually, it's mostly episodes of the X-Files, but still, there's more of those coming too, because Mathis has never seen it, or as he likes to creepily say every single time, he's an X-Files virgin.
Do I?
So come on down to patreon.com/Chilluminati pod for a rip-roaring old time. We're not anything but what you make us, folks. Remember that.
That's very true.
Remember that.
He's correct. Remember that. Remember that while we're going through part 2 of the Bell Witch haunting. Are you boys ready to jump back in?
Yeah. This is one of the most interesting stories because of how the vibe is with this person. The vibe with this person is so large and unbelievable that I have trouble believing like what is true, how crazy these stories are. It might as well be the Grinch sometimes.
The ghost bit doesn't seem to be connected with her at all.
Yeah. So last week we did our episode was very much focused on the 2 main individuals that are involved, John Bell and Kate Batts, old Kate, who would eventually be known as the Bell Witch, the reason that this all took place. We very much went into her history. And while I was going to have today be the final piece, many things ended up on this show. This is actually going to be a part 2 of 3. We're going to 3-part because we're going to go deeply into the haunting itself this week, the very specifics of a lot of the things. And as we go along, the reason I kind of decided to go with a part 2 of 3 is because as we start reading through these, there's going to be a lot of similarities to an episode we did a very, very long time ago. Jeff the Mongoose. And that'll become more clear as we go. But this is one of those things where the haunting and the entity itself, taken as real, doesn't make a lot of logical sense as to it being like a demon or an actual ghost. And we'll get into it. So let's recap where we left off. We left off last week.
This is a squeakquel?
This is crazy.
You're telling me this is a Jeff the Mongoose squeakquel right now? A backdoor surprise squeakquel?
It is. It's a backdoor surprise Jeff the Mongoose squeakquel, part of my S7 series, part 2 of 3.
Make sure that there's a backdoor surprise Jeff the Mongoose squeakquel somewhere in the title of this episode. Backdoor surprise Jeff the Mongoose.
You're going to be surprised at some of the similarities. You really
are. In context, it all makes sense, and yet it sounds insane.
Right, exactly. And I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So we left off last week with a reverend showing up, if you remember. Not the reverend from the small town that they lived in, but a reverend that there was a family friend from prior to them moving out from North Carolina to Tennessee. His name was Reverend James Johnson, and he was close friends with the Bell family and spent a few nights there, having experienced many different things. The knocking, the scratching, the loud sounds that were the dragging chains, if you remember that. When you guys asked why chains, did you guys read the subreddit? You got answers.
It feels like everybody feels like it's just Charles Dickens, right?
I mean, I think it was related to either the two answers that I saw were related to slaves or related to the spirit being chained down in that Dickens-esque way to reality. Symbolism. Yeah, symbolism. Exactly that.
I love the speculation. I appreciate people engaging with culture in that way. That's pretty cool, man.
Right. Yeah. And with the other parts of the haunting, Betsy Bell was getting slapped across the face. Her hair was being pulled. Her sheets were being ripped off of her bed in the middle of the night. And anytime the Reverend tried to pray this thing away, it would mock him, if you remember correctly. He would just make fun of the prayers. We're going to get more into that actually this episode. Because the things it would do would just constantly taunt the Reverend. Things like saying why do you bother, James? Your prayers will do no good. Personal taunts directed at him, James Johnson, do you really think you can stop me? You have no power here, James. That's what, and he would just be praying at it, and it would just sometimes mockingly just repeat the phrase back at him. And one of the things it would say was
is there any indication of what that could possibly have really been besides a ghost? It's only something that would happen if it was fake. You know what I mean? It's a thing that's made just to sound like a ghost. It's just so funny to me. It's just so weird.
And then mixed with the mocking would be more kind of ominous things. When asked what it was, Kate, it would say, I am Kate, and I have come to torment John Bell unto his death. Another one would be, what are you doing here? And it responded, I will see John Bell dead and gone. That is my work. And then he would go, say things like, you are as powerless as they are, preacher. Just consistent taunting of this of James Johnson, this individual, this reverend that made this journey out to try and deal with this spirit thing that was just, kind of just constantly tormenting this family. Now, if you recall, he was, Johnson was there helping the family, while he was at because he was out of town, and a friend to the Bell family. So when the Reverend had all this shit happen to him, he decided, fuck it. You know what? Let's just tell the entire town. Let's get everybody involved. Let's let everybody know. And maybe with the power of the group belief in God, a group prayer, we can actually shove this thing off and we can move this thing. And this is how it almost becomes very, very public.
Going back to what Alex was saying a little bit ago about what's the deal here? There's got to be something. I did see a bunch of people on Reddit talking about how potentially there could have been some abuse involved with what was going on in the household. But the way you just described it seems to me like there was a big public display against, the church, right? And Bell had this whole problem with what this woman was doing. And it seems to me like a lot of people came together to put out some I don't know if lie is the right word, but cause some drama around this woman, and then went into town and said, hey guys, there's a ghost and it's by this woman, because they didn't like her, right? That's what it seems like.
Sure, that's absolutely how it seems, especially with last episode, how this whole fucking thing even begins in the first place, with that giant show in the church where she sat on the guy and was just preaching nonsense at him as he was suffocating under her. Yeah, that's how it starts. And that's why I want to deeply dive into the haunting itself, because it very much veers away from Kate Batts and becomes its own thing, where Kate Batts is not really a character in today's episode. She's not really around in this episode. And that's what makes it so fucking weird. Thank you so much to today's sponsor, Hero Forge. And God, I was so excited when they told me they wanted to do some more sponsorships. If you know me, you know I'm a huge tabletop RPG nerd. I just wrapped up a 6-year-long campaign with some of my players a few weeks ago now, and we're already prepping for the next big one. And of course, we need minis. And I go to Hero Forge for the best quality minis out there. I absolutely love them, and especially when we get to start a new campaign, there's something really fun about jumping onto Hero Forge and just starting to put your hero together piece by piece, getting to look exactly the way you want so that when it comes in, you start playing, you have that connection with that character right away. That, and if you were like me and you have a 3D printer, you can actually buy the digital files even cheaper and print it at home, so you don't have to worry about all the shipping if that's something you don't want to worry about. But look, my 3D printer can't do 8K models, it can't do super hyper bright colors. There's a lot of things it just can't do that Hero Forge can do, and for those premium minis, that's what I go to Hero Forge for. Hero Forge offers fully customizable tabletop minis with dozens of fantasy species and thousands of parts to choose from, all within your browser. Hero Forge offers custom minis in a variety of material, including bronze, color standees, and color plastic options. Hero Forge also offers downloadable model files for the 3D printer that I was talking about earlier, and Hero Forge is constantly expanding its catalog of customization options, adding new parts every week and major features like new species and custom posing on a regular basis. Listen, they don't have to tell me why I should like Hero Forge. I've used them well before I ever worked with them. I've been using them for years. If you're a tabletop person like I am, just go check them out. Just go check out Hero Forge. It's going to be well worth your time. And if you decide you want to get any of the things that are there, just make sure you use code CHILL on checkout for 5% off all orders of physical miniatures. It's not combinable with any other special promotions or sales though, but if there's none there, go ahead and use code CHILL, 5% off all your physical minis and stuff. Just go check it out, man. Just go check it out. And while you're there, they've even got a Hero Forge Pro subscription. That's the perfect way to keep your minis game just top notch. Just check it out. Anyway, thank you, Hero Forge. I could just keep rambling about you forever. I appreciate your sponsorship. Bye. And so with this Reverend Johnson going out, letting the town know, maybe we can do something about it. This would obviously, the local Reverend would hear about it. And he was maybe a little bit annoyed that he wasn't the one that was called in, as he arrived as a very skeptic individual. The local Reverend would try to head over to the house and dismiss the events in the house as nothing more than a prank by Kate Batts. Now, last week, as I said, we talked about how John Bell believed Kate was sending over her slaves to bang and knock on the homestead to make all the sounds of the haunting that were happening, which was kind of an absurd thought in and of itself. And the local Reverend decided to take that idea and he went further with it, saying, no, actually, the reason that the sheets are being pulled off of young Betsy Bell wasn't because of a spooky ghost, was because Kate had instructed her slaves to come over to the house, climb to the top of the building, drill small holes in the ceiling so that they would then drop fishing line down, hook the bed sheets in the middle of the night, and yank them off of her in that way. And that's how that was happening.
What? Okay, so
yeah, I'll let you probably the faces that you're making. I was like, you got to process that thought.
Not a detective, clearly. This is some of the craziest. Like,
okay. So he's telling this to who? He's telling it to everyone. He's telling this to
this is what he's saying. He's like, that's how it's happening, and I figured it out.
And everybody's like, yes, Reverend, you're right.
He also had, before we get to how they responded, he also had an explanation for the slapping that Betsy was incurring. See, the small holes drilled in the ceiling were dual purpose. One for the fishing line and two for the pea shooters that they could fire through and hit Betsy in the face when she slept.
What?
This is a lot of work.
This is like when this is like when the serial killer has a fake version of an app made that's has different information on it or some shit like that. That's just so impossibly
so much
crazy.
Work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but of course they're like, you know what? Maybe Reverend's right. So they went up onto the roof and fucking inspected the roof for holes and found none. There was no holes in the roof, no fishing line, no pea shooters. That shit wasn't happening. And this went on, remember, for years. It all started in 1817. However, in 1818, John Bell also began coming down with the mysterious illness that we spoke about last week. The symptoms that showed up that began were minor, but noticeable for John. He would have occasional dizzy spells and spells of weakness where he couldn't like hold himself up, alongside the occasional twitching and swelling of his tongue, making it very difficult for him to speak and swallow every so often. And that's kind of all just starting to begin in 1818. 1818 was also the year their youngest daughter, and one of the focus points of the haunting itself, turned 13 years old, which means obviously, boys, that she's an adult and it was time to start getting her courted and married to somebody in town. And there were two people who were very interested in being her future husband. The first was a man by the name of Richard Powell, who was, let's play guess his age. How old do you think Richard Powell is? Future
42.
husband, potentially, of young 13-year-old Betsy Bell.
726.
Okay, we got what? 40 what, Jesse?
46.
46. Alex?
726.
We'll say 70 then? Is that,
Yeah,
is that
sure,
your guess?
fine. Yeah, that works.
Oh, luckily younger than both of your guesses, but still not great at the age of 31 years old.
So the opposite digits.
Yes, very, yeah, exactly. I didn't even notice that. Nice job. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
called numerology, baby.
And you might be wondering how this man, Richard Powell, 31, knew Betsy Bell. Well, of course, it's because it's a small town and he was her local school teacher. So that's good. Teacher having the hots for his 13-year-old student.
How did that go down?
So as the story goes, actually, funnily enough, apparently Richard Powell came over one day to speak with the mother. But Powell wasn't actually interested in pursuing the now newly matured daughter, but it was the mother, Lucy Bell, who actually brought it up. As it's told, he was simply there to discuss her education, her grades, typical teacher-parent stuff. And it was Lucy Bell who brought up her romantic prospects, apparently saying, quote, "I know you're sweet on my daughter." Ugh, I don't know. It's just like the worst. I can't imagine a mom saying that to a teacher
like
about
the
her
fucking
own
opposite
13-year-old
of
kid.
This seems like one of those, all right, I'm either getting rid of my kid or I'm getting something out of this deal. Like this is like,
I just think it's the time. 1818,
I mean, the
baby.
time was that if, you had a daughter, you'd get like, all right, yeah, we'll marry him off to your family. And then I get in return, what?
Nothing as far as this story goes. There's no, I mean, as far as I understand. However, like I said, there was a second individual involved in this. Obviously, Richard Powell was interested when it was brought up, but her daughter was already being courted by a different young man, one way closer to her own age, but still not super great. A boy by the name of Joshua Gardner, who was 18 years old. And he was already kind of courting and flirting with Betsy now at this point. And it seemed like the mother, from my angle and what I was, from what I've read, it just seemed like the mom was more interested in her being with an established like man as opposed to like a boy in her eyes, maybe.
I mean, that was the vibe.
That's how it seemed.
Yeah, you want to get a guy who's like has some sort of social standing and money and can take care of you, because it wasn't really about like what she wanted.
Yes,
it was
correct.
about like, look, you're his now. Deal with it.
That's exactly correct. That's how it was. But right as their conversations began about Betsy's romantic prospects, a sudden, extremely loud scream from Betsy herself in her room was heard. And so the two of them leapt up, ran out from the kitchen and over to the Betsy's room to see the door was shut and jammed at the bottom with bed sheets. Like it was like almost like forced to stay shut. But there wasn't much.
She was smoking weed in there?
Yeah, that's what she's. Yeah, I think that's still legal in 1818, actually, along with like opium and all kinds of crazy shit.
Yeah.
So as they got to the door with a very minor struggle, they pushed the door open. And it was Richard who was able to get the door open, where he saw Betsy on her bed with both of her arms being held up, protecting her face. And that sort of like, no, she's like brought them up to her face to like protect her face from being slapped. But soon after, one of her arms was flung up to the side and a loud slap could be heard as Betsy was whacked by an invisible force, like in front of the mother and in front of Richard.
Like as if a force overtook her, pulled her own arm out of the way.
She was like invisibly, her arm like flying up, and then they just heard a,
okay,
she got slapped. Immediately following was a brief moment of silence, and then the sound of someone hawking up a really gross loogie, like deep in their chest. Just bodiless voice of someone just hawking up nastiness. And then all the candles suddenly went out, and the sound of some dude just kind of hawking up like phlegm continued on for a little bit before the poltergeist supposedly ended it by bursting out into laughter and then going completely silent for the rest of the night.
It sounds like a drug hallucination. It sounds like they're like there's like a mold in their house that's like going in their fucking brains and tripping them out. Like they sound like weird little like weird hallucinations. You know what I mean?
You just think like there's something in the water in the town is just like on like low dose psilocybin, and they're just fucking having like hallucinations throughout the day.
One time I had a thing in my toilet that told me I was never going to be the same again. You know what I mean?
I did not have that when I was, my bad trip was my legs melting into the floor over and over again.
I'm just saying it's not crazy that this guy like, you know, took a sip of water and was like, oh shit. Whoa.
But the thing is, and this is the next part, it wasn't just their home it was at. It was Betsy. It seemed to follow her. One of the other things that happened is one of the nights where she was spending the night at a friend's house, like with her friend, the haunting happened there in front of this whole other family. She got slapped in the middle of the night. There was, her sheets were pulled out. She got yanked across the floor. And like, it seemed like the focus of this energy, at least right now, is very heavily on Betsy. And that that's what the journals and one of the bookstores talking about is this particular time where she went over to the friend's house and then all this happened. And you got to keep in mind too, the whole town is now also convinced that this phenomenon is real. The Reverend went around town, letting people know, hoping that it would work out. And everybody in town, and this kind of goes back to your original point, Jesse, it's once they all were well aware of this and seeing it happen everywhere and it not ending, the town began to blame this phenomena on Kate for the haunting. And this is really the origin where the poltergeist being called the Bell Witch haunting, Old Kate, Kate Bat's witch, and other things kind of came from this town's understanding of all of this happening. Officially also kind of like putting a name on this like weird phenomena that happens. And it, depending on like what aspect you come at this from, some of the more wooey aspects of like naming something can just anchor it further, can like give it more power in a way. And so them almost kind of like putting a name on this, almost in the same way that we kind of speculate how UFOs look the way they do because that's what we're expecting them to look like. They all start putting a name on this thing and it starts acting in a certain way. Then maybe that's how it goes. That's again, the more kind of the wooey side of things, but it's just an interesting, like, keep that thought in mind as we continue. Cause the whole town now was convinced this was real. And now the Bells were running low on options. 2 reverends had failed to remove this thing entirely. Nothing was working. And then John Bell thought, well, maybe they should just attempt to try and maybe directly communicate with this thing. If they could figure out what this thing wanted, then maybe, just maybe, they could get it to leave. And up until this point, other than the mocking when the priests would like do their prayer, the spirit never actually like directly conversed with them. It was just sounds and weird shit happening and the slapping. But when the priest would pray, voices would happen.
Voices from where? Just like ethereal voices?
And like, yeah, just like the voice of this thing responding to them in mocking tones and mocking the Reverend. So it wasn't coming out of
the kid's mouth?
No, it wasn't like an exorcist, like ventriloquist thing. This thing was happening like out of nowhere accordingly. So it's like even weirder, which is again, very Jeff the Mongoose like, which is how he spoke, was kind of like, you could only hear his voice unless he wanted you to see him. But he was like this disembodied voice from the walls and the ceiling almost always. And again, we'll get to more comparisons as this haunting continues. Because again, they're low on options now. The Reverends failed. So fuck it. Let's try to communicate with it. And so they went kind of the age old now. We'll ask you a question. You reply in knocks. If you like, and see how that goes. And they asked very specific questions. The 3 questions that I read about were, they asked the ghost how many rooms the house had, and it knocked 6 times for 6 rooms, which was correct. How many hours from here to Port Royal? And it knocked 7 times for a 7-hour journey, which was apparently correct at the time. And then my favorite question and my least favorite question, just favorite because it's absurd to ask, but least favorite because it's so racist. How many people did the Bells own? And it knocked 9 times for the 9 slaves that the Bells owned. So like that's the first communication directly back and forth outside of the Reverend mocking the Reverends. And at this point, Richard Powell, the 31-year-old interested in Betsy, had also kind of inserted himself into this at this point. He was dedicated to figuring out why this was happening and to save his poor potential 13-year-old girlfriend from this horrible spirit. And this is like the first like recorded ghost, bro. And like where he was like, fuck it. I'm going to try and talk to it in Latin or Greek, because if it's a ghost or a demon, they must all speak Latin or Greek. And not only am I going to ask it questions, I'm going to answer it and taunt it to fight me. And that's what he tried to do.
The birth of Zach Bagans.
Yeah, his thought is like, if he can make it become physical, he'll be able to like pin it down and beat it down or whatever. I don't like the thought process there.
Pin it down. Dude.
Yeah, just like you could physically beat it up. Maybe to some people's surprise, after he began trying to speak to it in Latin and Greek, this thing began to speak in return in a clear voice that everybody actually understood English. Him vocally attempting to communicate with it and taunt it seemed to allow it to speak, or gave it reason to speak. And so this is really where the speaking communication with this entity began. And this was all through 1818, a full year after most of 1817, all of 1818. We now move into 1819. Now, mixed with the usual cacophony of noises the bells were used to, they also began hearing a new sound. Muffled whispers around the house of someone that they said sounded incredibly familiar. It started taking on the voice of Reverend Johnson, who was still at the house trying to make this thing go away. And it was now beginning
to... Sure they weren't just tripping balls, dude?
I wish, maybe they were. This is...
like, this dude was slowly getting sick, right?
No, Reverend Johnson is not.
No, John Bell.
Yes, he's slowly getting sick. Yep.
And he's like the main witness. He's like the main witness of everything, right? John Bell?
No, this is happening to everybody who's in the home. And hold on to that thought, because it gets even crazier as to how many people start experiencing this shit. So yeah, they begin to hear the whispering voice of Reverend Johnson. And moreover, the occasional mocking of the Reverend became much more prominent. The spirit also had come up with a nickname for the Reverend when he went about his prayers attempting to remove the spirit, and the nickname for him was Old Sugar Mouth. I knew you'd fucking love
unexpected.
That, dude.
Unexpected.
Old Sugar Mouth.
Old Sugar Mouth.
Caught me off guard.
Why'd you say it like that? And his name was Old Sugar Mouth.
That sounds like something I would call my wife of 20 years.
That's like a off the dome D&D pull from Jesse.
Dude, Old Sugar Mouth. I was like, so this spirit now mocking the Reverend. During his sermons, he would sometimes the spirit would say, "Well, look who's here." Old Sugar Mouth himself.
Oh, Sugar Mouth.
Like carried like a taunting meaning. It would also often give sarcastic flattery, saying things like, "Sugar Mouth, your prayers are as sweet as honey, but they don't do a lick of good here." This thing
Where are you finding this voice? You sound like Rogue from the X-Men right now.
That's how it is. Old Sugar Mouth. How do you say old? You want me to go Old Sugar Mouth? Because like, how do you say Old Sugar Mouth without that?
It reminds me.
It's Tennessee.
No, you're totally, Mathis, you're totally right. I remember years ago. This is like 25 years at this point. But WPN, whatever the Chicago-based television network that used to exist, they one time were doing like a late night movie marathon, and the movie "I'm Gonna Get You Sucker" came on. But the announcer goes, "Next up, I'm going to get you, sucker." I keep thinking about that. It's the same thing here, like Old Sugar Mouth.
Perfect.
Say you have to say it with the twang, or you just don't say it at all.
Yeah, you gotta have a little flavor in there, or else it does not work.
Old Sugar Mouth. Why don't you sweet talk me some more? Another one was like, as it would get his exorcisms would get more intense, it would start undermining him, saying, "Why don't you sweet talk me some more, Old Sugar Mouth? I'm not going anywhere." Then it would begin to do what a lot of like poltergeists do. It started questioning his faith, saying things like, "Go on, Sugar Mouth, say more of your pretty words, but they're no match for me." That's why, again, there was just that over and over and over. The mocking of Bible passages got even worse, as at the ends of the Reverend's prayers, the disembodied voice would then recite the Lord's Prayer itself, followed by saying, quote, in a mocking tone, quote, "Demons, in the name of Jesus Christ, be silent and go out of this house forever." So it was just doing its own exorcisms. It was doing its own shit after the Reverend was done. I was like, and you know, I'll close this out.
That is so crazy, dude.
Yeah. And when it said old sugar mouth and shit, it would take on a feminine voice. It would become a female.
Whose account is this? Like, who is this raconteur telling us this?
Remember, these are like their journal page accounts and interviews with people, but it's also like decades and centuries.
You're telling me there's
like
5 journals out there where they're like, the ghost called the priest old sugar mouth.
So the answer is yes, because this becomes very public. Like, this becomes a place where we'll talk about, but someone from 800 miles away comes down
just
on
to check it out,
to check it out for a couple nights. Like, that's like, you'll see, we'll get there.
What a strange and interesting plant you've got there in the window.
That's why this is like one of the more interesting old hauntings, because of how many witnesses to this thing there were. Like, the stories are everywhere. But yeah, it would mock its own. It would do its own, the Lord's Prayer at the end. It would then say that thing about getting out in Jesus' name, before, it would continue insulting, taking on a feminine voice when it would insult the Reverend. However, the voice, while now directly communicating with them, when it was asked questions directly, it still responded in like vague, mysterious non-answers. Like one night it was asked what it was and what it wanted, and it answered, "I'm a spirit of someone who was once happy but hasn't been disturbed." According to other accounts, it said, I am a spirit.
Blanche Dubois character you've created.
Yeah, I guess. "I am a spirit from everywhere."
Disturbed.
That's how I don't know what to tell you. That's what it is in my head. Then according to another, it said, "I am a spirit from everywhere, heaven, hell, and earth." Or the other one where it said, "I was once very happy, but I have been disturbed and made unhappy." So, non-answers, just like generic vagaries that could just mean fucking anything.
Do you feel like that means that it's like more likely like some guy like at Knott's Berry Farm, there used to be this prisoner who was like a guy who would sit in a cell, but he was like a sculpture. He was like a resin guy, right? And he had like a dopey face and he had like a speaker inside him, and he would talk to the people that were there. And so you'd send your kid to go talk to this guy and you go talk to this guy in a booth elsewhere, and you'd be like, it's their birthday. Their name is like Alex, and he's turning 10 years old. And then this prisoner would be like, "I heard it was your birthday today." And as the kid, am thinking to myself, holy shit, this thing is real somehow. I don't know. So my question is that what's going on here? Because the guy would like say vague things like, I'd be like, "How did you get in jail?" He'd be like, "Oh, I messed up." Like, because he doesn't want to commit to anything, because he doesn't want to get caught in like a lie. You know what I mean?
I say for right now that applies, but that changes in a bit. You'll see. You'll see. Like, I would say no. If this is what's happening, no, it's not, because it does start getting specific, but in very bizarre ways. You'll see what I mean. I don't want to spoil it before we get there. But shortly after this thing started verbally responding to questions, after a few days, it suddenly just vanished. It just stopped interacting. It stopped slapping Betsy. It stopped pulling, it stopped everything. All sounds just ceased for whatever reason. And it went away for months. It was gone. The family thought they were free. They thought they were done, that this thing was gone, that they interacted with it and whatever reason decided to go. But months later, one night when Betsy had a friend staying over, out of nowhere, Betsy had her, as she was laying down, her legs thrown into the air, while both of the shoes on her feet came flying off and flew up to the ceiling before bouncing down, while the two combs in her hair flew out from her hair and were thrown across the room. And no matter how hard she tried to open her mouth, an invisible force was pressing down so hard that all she could do was muffle and cry as she was trying to get the invisible hand that was on her off of her. And this began a brand new era of torture for poor young Betsy, as multiple sources claim Betsy would from this point on start falling into the occasional quote unquote fit, where she would faint, wake up, gasping for air before being pushed back down. Her eyes would roll back where you would only see the whites of her eyes, and she would begin rocking her head back and forth, desperate, like breathing kind of irregularly. And before she would eventually come to. And this, they said, lasted on average usually around 30 or so minutes. But for whatever reason, anytime this happened after these fits came to an end, it seemed the poltergeist had gained some burst of energy and it would appear every single time afterward. But unlike before, when it would taunt and tease and torture poor Betsy, this time, after drawing all that energy from Betsy going through this, what seems to be some sort of seizure, the poltergeist would arrive to rumor monger and gossip about the neighbors in town.
We're in Jeff territory, baby. It's Jeff style. We're big Jeffy style now.
This is Jeff style nonsense. It would talk about everybody in town who either skipped church, who in town were the alcoholics, who slept through their sermons, who beat their kids too much, and anyone that this spirit deemed was essentially lazy, whiling away the hours doing nothing productive with their lives.
The phrase "who beat their kids too much."
Yeah, too much.
Pretty loaded.
Just a little too much. Just a little too much.
Often this entity called people in town assholes and unironically claimed the values of living a full Christian life and praising Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
As demons do.
So what happened? Like, the person like who's responsible for this hoax is now like letting the like religious people use the mechanisms of the hoax.
Yeah. Like, I don't like at this point, like the theories are interesting. Cause like, I don't know why it would do this. Like what the hoax would be like to just take it to God, because there are stories of demons who also, who supposedly also mock priests as they attempt to exorcise them in prayer. Is this like a demon kind of doing its own thing and being like, see, I can do whatever I want. I can talk about God. Or is it like more along the lines of what I think is like that trickster theory, this thing of like unknowable intelligence that's just here and fucking around because it's enjoying torturing 3-dimensional creatures or whatever, like Jeff the Mongoose.
Mr. Mixoplixix, whatever the
guy's
name is.
That's Jeff the Mongoose, right? The fact that it would call people in town assholes and then unironically apparently claim the values of living Christian life is fucking hilarious. And the fact that it just ratted people out for the fun of it, super funny to me. I love that. The ghost also utterly and thoroughly hated slaves. The poltergeist was wildly racist. So like more so than the Bells and like the other people who owned slaves, which is as racist as you could get. This thing apparently said words and shit to the slaves that even the family wouldn't dare say, according to the stories. I don't know why. If he's a Christian, I feel like that's just not a very Christian thing. So the Bells were like, you know what? Let's use this. It hates the slaves. Let's bring the slaves to spend the night in the house and see if we could just drive off the ghost.
Genius.
Because it hates the slaves so much. And that's what they brought the slaves in. And all that ended up being was apparently the slaves were just verbally tormented all night by the ghost. And just yelled at, and all the noises still happened, and it didn't fucking work. At this point of the story, it had spread wildly. And instead of, John Bell, instead of closing his doors and pushing people away, as it became the town kind of talk, John did the opposite. He welcomed people into his home. He allowed folk to come to the house, spend the night, investigate on their own, and so on. And before you say, oh, this is where he made money, you're wrong. I wrote Jesse in the script. You're wrong, Jesse. Yeah, no problem.
You wrote Jesse in the script.
Not only did John not charge a dime, he provided blankets and food for these people. He would cook for them. According to him, the reason he did this was that he had a fear of appearing to profit off of his daughter and his family's misery. He didn't want people to think that he was making money off this. So he spent money and fed people and shit and allowed these people to come in. But I think it's an interesting way to kind of handle it if this is really going on. But isn't that exactly what the Jeff the Mongoose thing did? Remind me, Alex, did the family and the Jeff the Mongoose, when they allowed people in, did they charge? I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you could just come by, but there was some sort of scam element to it at some point. I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah, I haven't either. We should see that for Rotten Popcorn. One of these days.
Brand new show. Check it out.
I wonder.
Patreon.com/Chilluminati.
I feel like despite no money exchanging hands, in a world where you're feuding, I wonder if the idea of being liked is more valuable than money. And
that's this is the thought is twofold, at least for me. Is one, I think, is that, Jesse, this is a time where demons and all this other shit is stigmatizing wildly to the family. It could be very shameful if this is happening. And the thought is maybe, well, if more people come in and realize it and see it, there's kind of this offloading of like shame. You're not hiding a secret. You're just opening the secret's doors and allowing everybody to see it for what it is. And the other thought for John was, maybe if I open my doors to anybody, somebody who can actually help will actually show up. Like, because everybody's failed so far. So let me just see who can get in.
Like a ghost expert? Like Hellboy?
Yeah, like a Hellboy could show up. Exactly that. Like maybe that would work. And a lot like Jeff the Mongoose, as we continue, as people showed up and spent time and interacting with this thing, individuals began to ask this creature about the origin of it. Like, where are you from? Why are you here? And depending on who asked, they would get entirely different answers. Like the Joker in some way, where like, depending on who's asking you, just got a different story. And sometimes it would go as far as asking the person what they thought its origins might be. Being like, wait, what do you think my origins are? Where do you think I come from? You tell me. You tell me where I come from.
Taking like creative writing notes.
Yeah. But like, I put myself in that mindset of Jeff the Mongoose, like these weird fairy entities or whatever that are here just to like fuck around. And it's like, yeah, I feel like that'd be a question to be like, no, I want to hear your theory. What's the funny little meat puppet think I come from? Like, what's your small little brain like tell you I come from?
Yeah, it's like very Fae vibes.
Very Fae vibes. Absolutely. And all of this, of course, would inevitably attract another Reverend to the house, a third Reverend to the Bell home, who has the best fucking name out of all of the Reverends so far. This is a Reverend James Gunn, spelled the exact same way as the director. Just imagine James Gunn.
But in the movie, played by his brother.
Yes, played by his brother. You're right. Correct. And when he arrived and began speaking with the spirit, he asked it not what are you? Where did you come from? He asked, who were you? And this apparently like pleased the spirit, because now the answer varies kind of source to source, but the general idea behind the answer is the same across the board. It answered, quote, I know exactly who I was, and you, Jim, are the only one who has ever asked me intelligent questions, and so you deserve an honest reply. I was one of the first white men to explore the region.
What?
Yeah, that's what it told him.
To explore the region?
Yes, that's what it told him. Not that Southern woman voice anymore. Now I was one of the first white men. That's what I am. Like, it's like, what? And it went on.
The Bell Witch.
Yeah, this is like saying this entity makes no sense the further you go. And it went on to say it even had proof, physical proof that it wasn't lying. It claimed that it had proof by saying it had buried a box of some gold in a piece of land. It gave directions to a large rock that was south of the Bell property, where supposedly, according to this thing, a box with some gold had been buried.
Now we're in time travel and computer land too. You know what I mean?
I know, but it gets even it gets even more insane. But there were some stipulations before it would tell you exactly where it would go. The stipulations were that only 3 of the people could go. Richard, Betsy's like 31-year-old husband, potential to be, her brother Drury, if you remember that, great name for last week.
Yes.
And the Reverend Old Sugarmouth himself had to go. Those 3 were the ones that had to go. And they would have...
They were sent on like a quest?
Yes! This thing send them on a quest. And when the other part of the stipulation was when they found the gold, all of the gold had to be given to Betsy. That was the stipulation. And they all agreed. And the 3 of them went out to the location that the ghost went. Only the 3 of them, they followed the rules. And after some time, they found the supposed rock. And it became apparent where they were supposed to dig, and they started digging. And after they kept digging and digging and digging, after some time, it became apparent that there was no box and there was no gold. However, Drury apparently was not simply ready to give up, and he began digging with his bare hands as he got deeper and deeper, but they never found anything. They got nothing. And when they returned home, sweaty, caked in mud after a long night of digging, the poltergeist broke out cackling with laughter and began making fun of them for believing a word that it fucking said, and loved the fact that they went out and spent hours digging it. So much so that when they started asking questions, it just mocked them in reply, mocked their questions. And this thing found it so goddamn funny that it kind of like, it became a regular story that this entity would tell strangers that were coming to investigate the home, talking about how humiliating it must have been for them to be digging for so long, and that he actually begun digging with his bare hands, and oh my God, how fucking hilarious it is. It like became part of her stand-up comedy routine kind of thing. It's fucking insane. I just like, you see why I'm like, we got to do 3 episodes. We got to just really dig deep into the haunting here because it's nonsense.
The hardest part for me to like grok, like to get my mind around, is like what the vibe is around this house at all times. Like, is it just like a fucking theme park at this point? Like, are just people coming in and like taking pictures and shit just constantly, or like what's the vibe?
Yeah, no, people are in and out spending the night. There are people that are there for like the thrill of it. You know, that, I mean, again, it's fucking 1818. What the fuck are you going to do with your life? This is entertainment. People go to interact with this thing, hear the sounds. They're the people that want to go and see if they can help them and like exercise this thing or remove this thing, which, you know, fails. Then there are people who are just skeptics and want to go and prove that they're joking or it was all fake and they fail. It's just, it all reminded me of the Jeff the Mongoose episode because it's the same thing where they open the doors, they invite people in, and this thing just seems to mold itself to the individual, having a grand fucking time doing it, asking insane shit because it would all, but also being like, this one isn't like Jeff the Mongoose in that. Remember, Jeff was sometimes helpful. He would like leave a rabbit for food. This doesn't do any of that stuff, but everything else about it is very like just trickster. It's like a trickster. It's just here to fuck around with you until it gets bored and then it leaves. This goes into that theoretical of like, and if poltergeists feed off of like energy and stuff, if everybody expected the curse to be real when Kate Batts does it, and it just kind of comes to form just because it's just what people are expecting, it starts being, you know, it starts responding to some people saying it's a witch or saying it's a spirit of Kate Batts like it did earlier. It's just weird. It's just fucking bizarre. What became clear, however, is as time went on, this haunting did seem to mold itself to each individual, as we saw with how it described its origin to each individual person. For example, those who showed up with the intent of purging it from the home usually got mocked, teased, made fun of. The typical thing that happened to the Reverend seemed to happen to those others. However, those who showed up and were skeptical usually had the worst experience by far, having ear-piercing screeches, the screams of their loved ones at a distance that they could never reach, and hallucinations so real that it supposedly sent some of them into a broken mindset running from the home in the middle of the night. Like, it hated skeptics, and I don't know why, but if I remember correctly, so did Jeff, right? Like, Jeff loathed skeptics in, they were the ones, he was the one that they taunted the worst.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if he loathed them, but he was very just rude to them.
Yeah, this one seemed to really hate skeptics, whatever this thing is. And all this time, over 1818 and now most of 1819, John is continuing to slowly slip into sickness. And as the true target of the haunting was still firmly, he was still very much the true target of the haunting, if we're to look at the suffering and the illness of this thing as part of this. But this attention of this house over these past couple of years also draws the attention of a Detective Williams from over 800 miles away that caught word of this and had a plan on heading out that way and disproving the entire fucking thing. This is like reminds me of like a Jesse, essentially, in that it's like the point here is like, there's got to be a logical explanation. There's got to be a reason all these things are happening. And he wants to be the one to be able to put the pin on it. And I don't know if he wanted to like monetize off of it or what, but it'd be a hell of a fucking resume to add if you're a detective to come out and solve the countrywide haunting that is like got everybody completely enamored with what's going on.
That's what Professor Layton would do. That's not what a real detective would do. That's like
well, maybe it's
like a whimsical, magical detective's job.
This is an 1820 detective, because now we're moving to 1820 when this is happening. Detective Williams was a skeptic and a professional investigator who traveled over 800 miles to investigate the claims of the Bell Witch haunting. And hearing about these events basically from far away in little newspaper articles, I imagine, it's never really specified how he kind of heard about it. But he was desperate to put rational methods to debunk all of this stuff because he figured that all of these strange occurrences was easily explained by hidden trickery or exaggerations by the locals to make it much more exciting to like talk about. And so upon his arrival to the Bell farm, Detective Williams began a systematic investigation of the home. He inspected the house, the outbuildings, surrounding farmland, looking for any possible evidence of trickery. He examined the structure of the house for hidden wires or mechanisms that could be used out of sight that would be responsible for the knocks, scratches, and moving objects. Like, I imagine he was looking for like a little handle that like was tied up to some wires inside the walls that would like rattle something on the inside
like
or whatever.
Your average like Wizard of Oz type setup or whatever, right?
yeah. What you typically do in 1819, 1820. As he continued his investigations, Detective Williams did experience some very light haunting stuff. Particularly, he heard knocks and scratches on the walls on that first day. He didn't hear the dragging of the chains or anything. So to him, even hearing these things, he's like, well, that's nothing. He dismissed them as just noises as a result of either environmental factors or soon became what he has described as the family still like pulling tricks that he's not able to catch exactly. And, to his credit, a settling house or what have you, absolutely possible, I think, to maybe explain some of maybe the more mundane sounds of the house, the knocks, the creaks and whatnot, especially if you're already primed to hear these things through the lens of I'm being haunted. Anything could sound like a haunting at that point. However, it was at night when he went to bed that things kind of went fucking haywire. The bells themselves were woken up to the sounds of a thud followed by what sounded like slapping. They ran to the room, which was where the detective was staying. And as they opened the door, they saw the detective there staring back at them, annoyed, on the floor. Apparently, what had happened is he got yanked out of bed, his legs got pinned down, and a heavy force sat onto his chest and just like pinned him to the ground. He couldn't move, and a voice apparently said to him as he got slapped for the first time while he's being pinned,
"You will never
tell
be
me,
the
Mr.
same.
Detective." No, the voice is like, again, that kind of silly, like taunting. Tell me, Mr. Detective, which the bells is sitting on top of you right now. Because he believed it was all the bells, and now this thing is like invisible forces sitting on him. A voice comes out of nowhere. Yeah. And as soon as the door is opened, the force lifts off of him, and that's when he's looking angrily back over at the family. Apparently, just before the heavy force got lifted and before he could even answer the ghost question, the ghost also punched him in the face.
What?
Yeah. It slapped him, asked him the question before he could answer it, punched him in the face, and then the door opened and it disappeared. So like, that's what was like, it didn't care about his answer. It just wanted to fucking hit him. It was just being mean. So when the bells flung the door open, the detective looked no worse for wear physically, though he was on the floor looking confused and pissed off, seemingly still blaming the bells for whatever just happened. But just then that poltergeist voice came again and it said, "Don't go blaming them. Now go sit in that chair like a good boy and maybe I won't knock off your head."
What?
Yeah, I know. I don't
wait to confirm.
Yeah.
He was being assaulted.
Yep.
And then the door opens, assault stops.
Yep.
But then after the doors open, everybody heard this demon like, go sit in that corner.
All three of them
sit
heard.
in the corner, sugar mouth.
No, it ain't sugar mouth. This is the detective. But yeah, like it just taunted him. And apparently he did. He sat in the chair because he just got his ass beat by an invisible ghost. And he waited wide awake until dawn. And as soon as the sun came up, he just quietly got up, got his things, called for his horse outside, and left.
That is fucking crazy.
It sounds like a good bit. Where he's just like, you know what?
Does.
No.
I'm good.
No.
And as he was apparently leaving the home, he was addressed by the Bell Witch one final time, saying, quote, "You've come 800 miles, but you'll return with nothing. Tell them what you've seen, but they won't believe you either."
Oh, I would have been like, "You little bitch."
Yeah, you
nasty
Give me
little
$100 to get put down like a little bitch.
And that is where we'll pick up next week for the final episode. And what gets it's silly now, but it gets dark as fuck moving forward as the focus moves from Betsy to almost John exclusively until John dies about 3 years later.
This is crazy to me because I thought for sure that you were going to tell me that this is about how like tall tales spread in the press. And it's like not.
It's another Jeff the Mongoose situation.
Yeah. It's just like a bunch of people saw it.
It's an insane story.
But part of me feels like it still is that, where it's very clear this is kind of like they went to the community and the community started talking about it. It became a thing rather than actually being real. But then again, everything that we're being told is it happened and no one saw it. I'm telling you it happened. But then every once in a while it's like everyone heard the voice. It's like, well, how? How'd that happen? Unless they're all in on it and it's there just to make Kate look bad.
Man, that's a dedicated 5 years, man, of like opening your doors and feeding people.
She had a whole multi-year revenge plot against them.
It's true.
Dude,
so I guess what are you going to do when you have all the money in the world and then people forced to do the work for you?
To me, the more I researched and
get into, I guess.
The more I was putting the episode together, the more it felt like it was like it really felt more akin to the Jeff the Mongoose situation than anything else, in that it just seemed to like bubble forth at a time where also like this Kate character pissed off a family and only leaned on that energy. It's just weird if, taking it as real, but it's the rumor mongering and all the weird, like non-ghosty demon stuff. That's the part where I'm like, that's so Jeff. Like that's a Jeff that's so Jeff. That's a t-shirt.
It's just so Jeff.
That's so Jeff. It's just so Jeff. But we'll wrap it up next week with the final part 3 of the Bell Witch haunting. As we move further into spooky October. I'm very excited to continue. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening. We're off to do a mini-sode over at patreon.com/Chilluminati pod. We appreciate you. We love you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Anyway, me and my wife were sitting outside indulging on our porch one night, enjoying ourselves. I needed to go to the bathroom, so I stepped back inside, and after a few moments, I hear my wife go, "Holy shit, get out here." So I quickly dash back outside, and she's looking up at the sky in awe. I look up too, and there's a perfect line of dozen lights traveling across the sky.